Welcome, everyone, to Talking Back to Suicide. I am your host. My name is Dr. Diane Kaufman, though I like to be called Diana for my creative self. I'm a poet, artist, humanism and medicine awardee, a retired adult and child psychiatrist, and I'm the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. I'm with my co-host, Kino Isaac, who's coming to us from South Africa. Kino is a DJ, music entrepreneur, music producer, and very importantly, a mental health advocate for independent artists. And I'd like to welcome our special guest today on Talking Back to Suicide, who is a poet, a lyricist, a grief advocate, and a multi-award winning author. And her name is Samantha, or as she likes to be known, Sam Evans Schroeder. She has a special gift in articulating what can be so hard to express, grief and loss, courageously and authentically sharing the life journeys that can still travel us to hope, healing, and resilience. All this comes from her lived experiences as deeply exemplified in her most recent book, The Prodigal Son. This is the story of Sam's marriage to her late husband, Clint. He died in June 2019, who was a pastor. His relapses into addiction, his being precipitously diagnosed with end-stage cancer, and the difficult yet grace-filled path that led to transformation and healing for them both. This is a story of love and redemption, a testimony from the heart, reassuring and telling all, you are not alone. So very warm welcome, Sam, to Talking Back to Suicide. And we're so glad you're with us today.
Thank you so much, Diane and Kino, for having me on the show today. It's an honor.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to kind of dive right in. Could you, maybe you could start by the prodigal son. That reminds me of something from the Bible. What is the story of the prodigal son?
So, for anyone who's not familiar with the story in the Bible, it's the story of a father who has two sons, and the younger son tells his rich father that he wants his half of the inheritance that he's supposed to get when his father dies. But he takes it early and he squanders it on drinking and booze and parties and prostitutes and who knows what else, right? Just the party lifestyle. And he runs through his money. And when he's out of his money and he is eating what the pigs ate because he is so hungry, he decides to go back to his father and beg for his father's forgiveness. And his father sees him coming and has tears in his eyes and runs and welcomes his son home. So that's the biblical story of the prodigal son. My late husband, Clint, had prodigal son tattooed to his forearms because he resonated with that younger son who ran away from God and got into lots of trouble, drinking and drugs and all sorts of stuff, and eventually went back home to God and to ask for forgiveness and received God's love after tons of mistakes that he made. So that's the story of the prodigal son, and it's named the prodigal son in part because of Clint's tattoos.
How did you meet your future husband?
No one has asked me that yet, actually. We met at a Christian music festival. There were 5 stages and tons of bands, and we walked around, and I met him through a mutual friend that I went to college with and he was going to church with at the time. And we started just walking to different stages and listening to different bands. He did not have my same taste in music. We found that out, but we clicked anyway.
What do you think you clicked over? Was it the music itself, or there must have been other things as well?
He shared his story with me. He was sober when I met him, and so he shared the adversity that he went through. And I think we were both attracted to the transparency and the authenticity that we found in one another, not being afraid to talk about things in our past or about who we were and talk about those hard things. We were real with one another, and that was one of the first things that attracted me to him.
So you wrote him, in a sense, his memoir, or
Yes.
it was a mutual, your story and his story. Tell us how the story evolved and what prompted you to write it down? And you even interviewed people in his life too.
I did. So he had gotten in a drunk driving accident in 2017. He'd been sober for 9.5 years. And the drunk driving accident, as you said in your beautiful introduction, oh my gosh, we found the cancer through his drunk driving accident. And he went to jail that night. The day after he was released from the hospital, he went straight to jail for fleeing police as a felony charge. And when he came home, he said, Sam, I want you to write my story. I want you to interview me and write my story. So I did, because he wanted people to know, like, there are so many people who feel like I'm a piece of garbage. I'm a piece of trash. I'm not worthy of love. No one loves me. There are so many people that feel that way. And he felt that way. And he wanted people to know, no matter how badly you screwed up or how bad you think you are as a human, like, God still loves you no matter what. God's love is not conditional. And so that's the story. That's the message of the prodigal son.
I'm pondering what you're saying. That's why I'm pausing. I'm thinking, although I think we can all feel that way, I'm also wondering, as a pastor, I don't know, the pressures upon one. Could you talk about that? I mean, to face up or own up or share one's past history, present history. And I'm wondering, I hope I'm getting this right. Maybe there was a recent article, could have been a pastor. Did he have a gambling addiction? Something recently came to light in the news. So I'm just thinking, because sometimes you have in those helping professions, right? That there can be additional shame kind of built in, which can be a risk factor for recovery itself.
100%. So, and you mentioned that I interviewed other people. I interviewed the intake officer, and she called a pastor to talk to Clint because he said, I think I might be suicidal. I think I don't want my wife to go through this. I don't want to live anymore. So he was put on suicide watch, and the intake officer called her pastor. Well, her pastor was actually close friends with Clint, and he struggled with that. He had two pastors come to visit him in jail and see him, with all, like, in the jumpsuit or whatever you want to call it, in handcuffs. And there's so much shame because he was a pastor who was arrested for drunk driving and fleeing police, and his mugshot was front page news. He had abrasions and scrapes and bruises all over his face, and that was front page news. That was newspaper, it was on TV, all sorts of things. And he really, I think the fall for him was harder because he was falling from a higher place where people respected him and they looked up to him and needed him. Like, he gave advice to other people on how to live well, how to live and to reach out to other people and to be a good human. He was giving people that advice, and then got in a drunk driving accident. So absolutely, the fall was really hard on him, and the shame was insurmountable at times. He told me once the only reason he didn't commit suicide was because we wouldn't get the life insurance money. So, and I don't know if that's true or not as far as how life insurance works, but that is what he believed, and that kept him alive on multiple occasions.
From a spiritual perspective, from your own faith, could you say something about the phrase fall from grace?
Sure.
What does that mean? Because as we were talking, I was thinking there's fall from grace, but there's also rising up with grace.
Right. So fall from grace, you think of like angels, fallen angels, right? It's that image of being a human that we look up to, and they're in a place of honor or prestige, and then they do something terrible and everyone looks at them. My goodness, how could he do that? How could she do that? And almost held to a higher standard, right? Like when police officers get in trouble, you don't expect police officers to break the law, but sometimes police officers break the law. And every human is capable of doing wrong. I think we're more surprised when someone, you said, like in a professional setting, a professional helper or professional counselor falls, meaning messes up badly, you expect more from them. And so it almost hits you harder, like, oh my goodness, how could that person do that?
Now, From understanding a bit about your book, your husband was also diagnosed with a very, very serious illness.
Yes.
Tell us how that came about.
The whole world was screaming, cancer, cancer, cancer. And I was like, wait, he got in a drunk driving accident. But also, the drunk driving accident gave us 20 more months with him. We had 3 young daughters. So he got in the drunk driving accident, and they scanned his body for broken bones and internal bleeding as part of the process. And they found cancer when they scanned him from the drunk driving accident. Also, people ask a lot whether or not other people were involved in the accident. No one else was involved. He hit like an electrical box and a parked car, but he did not hit people, and no one else was injured in the accident. So I just want to throw that out there. But the doctors found his cancer because of the drunk driving accident. We had no idea that he had cancer, and it was stage 4 when we found it.
And if it's okay with you to share with this, was it on a scan of the chest or the abdomen, or they were seeing lesions? Or describe a little bit about what they initially saw.
They saw a lesion on his lungs, and they saw another one on his liver. So when you see it in 2 different places, it's automatically stage 4, and stage 4 is the highest progression of cancer. Humorous, not humorous. There was no lesion on his liver. His liver was engorged because of how much alcohol he'd had the night before. I kind of think that's funny, but it's not really fun. You can choose whether or not to laugh about that or not, but he did not have cancer on his liver. But when he went into Mayo Medical Center, they did find specks of soft tissue cancer, but they found it in his lung. So it was not lung cancer, but they found specks of the cancer in his lung. And at that point, it's stage 4. And the specks in his lung weren't operable. There's nothing they could do about it. So we tried to make it smaller with chemo. And for a while that worked, and until it didn't, honestly.
In retrospect, were there any symptoms? I don't know, fatigue, weakness, weight loss, something? Or this was a total shock of presumably, apart from the alcohol use, a healthy man?
Healthy. Looking back, hindsight, we think maybe he was self-medicating with the alcohol. He relapsed in January, and he hid it from me for about 7 months. I caught him a couple times, but I didn't know the problem was as big as it was. I was also in denial. But people suggest that maybe his body felt funky, and so the drinking was part of his self-medication. He also played football. He played semi-pro football against grown men. So he was always bruised or had bumps and, complaining about an ache in his back or an ache in his ribs, so he played football, like I said, and the cancer by his rib was formed around a broken rib. He had a broken rib, and we didn't know it. And we don't know if the rib was broken during football or the cancer weakened it and then it broke because of football, or the cancer just caused the broken rib. We don't even know, but he had that broken rib. But he was always he wore his bruises like badges of honor. Look what I got today, And so he was always in pain. We had no idea that anything else was going on.
How many days later was the scan done? Because there he is having being in jail related to the fleeing the police and the accident. So there he is. And then he was still there, and they sent him to a hospital to be checked out medically, or what?
He was only in jail for 3 days. He was released. We did not pay for bail. They waived his bail. And in part, I believe, honestly, so that he could get the medical attention he needed. And they also knew he wasn't a flight risk because he had ties to the community, and there were all sorts of things going on. So, we ended up going to Mayo, I think, in November. So it was about a month before we could get in and get those tests taken care of. I think November 15th. So 6 weeks later, he was getting those scans done to figure out exactly what was going on.
What was his reaction and your reaction upon hearing a cancer diagnosis?
Well, when the doctor first told us he thought it was cancer in the hospital that day after the accident, Clint looked at me and he said, "I have cancer. I'm going to die." And I said, "We don't know if it's cancer or not. because it wasn't a biopsy at that point. It was just a CAT scan. So they saw a mass, but they didn't know what it was. And I said, it's not cancer until it's cancer. We're not calling it cancer until oncologists can research it and tell us what it is.
So was there a follow-up appointment that took a month to get?
Yeah, I mean, his first chemo appointment was in December, actually pretty close to Christmas. So it took a few weeks. Part of the reason it took so long, because I'm trying to think, the timeline is kind of hazy in there, and I don't go into this part necessarily in the book, because they did a biopsy and they sent it in. So I remember his first appointment being in November, but I think that there were tests done before that. But the first hospital that tested the tissue diagnosed him with the wrong type of cancer. And if he had done treatments for that, they called it melanoma. And if he had gone through treatments for melanoma, it wouldn't have done anything. He would have died within 2 months. So then we got a second opinion. Someone encouraged us to get a second opinion, and Mayo took a very long time. And they said it looks a lot like melanoma for whatever reason, but it's not. It's a sarcoma. And it took them a long time to diagnose it because they wanted to get it right. And they also knew that this other hospital had said it was melanoma, but they didn't necessarily agree. They wanted to be sure. And so it took longer than it needed. Not that it took as long as it needed to, but it took longer than we wanted it to because of that.
And when Clint said, please write my story, right? Mm-hmm. Was that after the diagnosis of cancer was made?
Yes, he knew he was going to die. He knew things were not looking good. He said, Sam, I want people to know my story. I want this to be out there because there are so many people who are dealing with shame and addiction and all sorts of, depression issues and mental illness issues. And I want people to know what they're going through is normal, I'm going through what they're going through. A lot of other people experience what they're experiencing. They're not alone, and they're not beyond redemption.
What was your reaction when he asked you?
I didn't want to write the story. Please, God, no. Please, no. Please, no. It was a really dark story. He talks about how he grew up with ADHD before people really understood what ADHD was. So he was treated poorly by peers, by adults in his life. And
could you explain that? How did they react, and why did they react that way?
I don't think people really understood what it was. He was abused by a babysitter at one point, physically and emotionally abused, treated differently than his brothers. She talked to people in the community and encouraged other parents in the community not to invite him to birthday parties. So his brothers would be invited to birthday parties and he was forced to stay home because they would specifically say Clint is not invited. His parents did their best, but I think there were a lot of things they didn't understand. And his dad was in the Navy, for trying to support his family, doing the best he could to support his family. But his mom was a single mom of 3 boys. So, she's doing jobs as a single mom, single parenting, and 3 crazy boys. So there was just a lot of attention that he needed. And I feel like he didn't get the attention that he required in order to, the tools, the help that he needed in order to overcome some of that stuff. He joined a fight club in 1st grade, of all things. I don't know how teachers did not see what was going on or fix that, but these kids were fighting another class on the playground. It was one class against another class, and they would have these fist fights on the playground. It was play fighting until it wasn't. There was one day where Clint was fighting a kid in 1st or 2nd grade, and the punches became real, and the look in their eyes was real, and the animosity, right? And so from there, it became Clint getting bullied, and then he became the bully, and then he started using drugs. And about 9th grade was when he started smoking weed, and then that was his true gateway. We joke or talk about weed being the gateway drug. It truly was for him. And then he got into harder drugs. He smoked snorted cocaine, and right after he graduated from high school, I think he was 19. And that was an almost immediate addiction for him. He became a crack addict where he was smoking crack. And then the alcoholism, he was out drinking 25-year-olds by the time he was 16. So it just snowballed and became this bigger thing. And then you're not doing the right things. You're not living the right way. You're not supposed to be getting drunk and high when you're in high school. So there's shame that compounds the shame that, forces you to go drink or do drugs to forget about the things that you're doing. And it was a vicious cycle, as I'm sure you're aware with other people you've talked to or worked with.
Yeah. And thinking back to ADHD, the overactivity, the impulsivity, lack of attention, focus of attention, it could, if one doesn't understand that this is a medical disorder, you could think, oh, this is purposeful, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they're doing this on purpose. Now, of course, ADHD doesn't necessarily have to be the overactivity. There can be an inattentive type. However, right, in its full cluster of the overactivity and the poor attention span and being impulsive, it can wreak havoc on social interactions. It's hard to take turns, right, and be cooperative and polite if you have that going on. And it can also impact your academic performance as well. But was he treated for that? Or was it not recognized that
he was treated eventually, but I don't know how good he was about taking the medicine. Even when we were married, he still struggled with ADHD. And I didn't understand it. And he didn't like the way the drugs made him feel, so he didn't take the drugs. But I would spend the entire time cleaning the house so that it would, stay at home mom, clean the house so that it looks nice when he comes home from work. And he would come in and just drop things wherever he was. Like you could follow his path through the house. And I took it personally that he didn't go and pick up his stuff, but he just he had no idea what he was doing. Like he would forget what he did.
Yeah, the height of distraction. Yeah.
100%. But it took me years and years and years to understand that it was not personal. And even when I understood that he wasn't doing it to be a jerk or to be mean, it still hurt me. Like his actions still affected me. So even knowing the truth was hard to work through that. And then I saw a lot of how ADHD and depression go hand in hand, because he would get stuck on a thought and he couldn't get himself off of that negative thought. So he would just stay there. And so I learned a lot about how ADHD and depression and addiction all swirl around one another.
When he was let's say in high school and had started using drugs, were his parents aware that something was off, or was this all being hidden from them?
They were aware. I think he hid a lot of it from him. I don't think they knew how bad it was. And I have to be careful, but they didn't know how bad it was. They didn't know how to react to it. They didn't know how to help him, I don't think. Again, he was volatile when he got drunk. And so coming up against that and saying, Clint, you can't do that, even as a parent, like he was very disrespectful to his parents, so they didn't know what to do. And I just don't think they knew how to handle it. I think a lot of people are not equipped to handle it, or they don't want to see what's happening in front of them. They don't want to admit how bad it is. My kid's not an addict. My kid, just used drugs a couple times. There's no way. The thing with addiction, though, is no one chooses to become an addict. You use a drug and suddenly that's the thing that claws at you and pulls you inside out. I've told my daughters multiple times, you cannot try drugs. A lot of people will experiment with different drugs. You have addiction in your DNA. You might be an addict, and you're not going to know what you're addicted to until you try the drug and you're addicted to it. So you cannot mess around with that.
It's the addicted brain. Some people don't realize that. It's the brain that's craving, and we're the body, the vessel that's doing what the brain wants us to do. So I want to ask you, how did Clint become a pastor?
He, in his own words, God knocked him upside the head with a 2x4. That's how he describes his experience. He got in a drunk driving accident in his 20s, like in his early 20s before I met him. And he was court ordered to go into a rehab facility. He chose a Christian rehab facility, and they brought him to church. So he felt like he heard God speaking to him, and just, lay it all at the altar, lay it down. And so that's what he did. And that's how he became a Christian. He was a Christian for about 6 years before he felt like he was supposed to be a pastor. And I didn't want him to be a pastor. That was when we met. I knew he was a Christian. Like, you have no intention of becoming a pastor, right? Because I didn't want to be a pastor's wife. I'd seen that call in different people's lives, and I didn't want it. And so,
why? What had you thought about it or seen about it?
Well, because I was in ministry, I was in youth ministry, and I saw how church members treated pastors' families with poor boundaries, parsonages, right? Parsonages belong to the church. And so a lot of times church members think, well, our church owns this house, so we can just come over whenever we want, or we can come in without knocking, or so it was really a boundary issue for me. And then also it's a huge sacrifice. It is a position of service where you are giving yourself as a counselor. It's similar to a counselor, but it's all the time that you are helping people in need and you're giving. And I sound so awful right now. I wanted to choose when to serve, but not to necessarily like have to do it all the time. If that makes sense. I sound like a terrible person right now. I didn't want to be a pastor's wife. And I was safe. He didn't want to be a pastor until he came home from school one day and said, I think God's calling you to be a pastor. And I said, I think you're wrong. Go ask him again. Go check. So.
And yet you became a pastor's wife.
I did. I became a pastor's wife. I was like, point God. And I do minister to people, but I do it in my own way. I do it through my writing. I've had so many people thank me for writing The Prodigal Son. I wrote another book about miscarriage. I've had thousands of women thank me for writing that book. And a lot of women have described it as having a friend walk through their infant loss with them. So I still minister, but it's different. And this is my calling. This is my giftedness, to be able to articulate loss and hard things in a way that other people can't put into words.
Sam, with your book on miscarriage, had you also experienced a miscarriage yourself or known someone that did?
Yeah, so I wrote the book because I experienced a miscarriage. And then while I was writing the book, I experienced a second miscarriage. I've had 3 miscarriages total. So I have 3 babies on earth and I have 3 babies in heaven. And it's been a really great thing for people just to know that they're not alone in that pain. And then the miscarriage book, it's called Love Letters to Miscarriage Moms, but I invited other people I knew into the story. So I have friends that share about stillbirth and early infant loss and adoption and infertility, things like that. So it's not just miscarriage, it's a broader spectrum of infant loss.
It was recently Mother's Day. Could you speak on infant loss in the context of Mother's Day and the meaning of that?
Yes. So I actually have a YouTube channel called Miscarriage Unedited that your viewers can go take a look at. And there's a Mother's Day video on there because Mother's Day is such an atrocious holiday for women who have experienced infant loss. And it leads to severe depression, especially if you're dealing with the postpartum emotion and hormone of losing an infant. It can be just traumatic. So to any of your listeners who have experienced infant loss and are just dealing with that, I just want to say you are a mom. Whether or not you have babies on earth, you are a mom. And I call myself a mother of more because you can't see all of my babies. They're not all pictured in our family photograph. So you are a mother of more. And all of your babies count and all of your babies matter.
Sam, Kino, join in. What's been resonating for you?
Yeah, some deja vu going on.
A little bit. I'm trying to change up the answers here, Kino, a little bit for you.
Yeah. Sam, okay, let me start with The Prodigal Son focuses around 3 topics: recovery, loss, and grief. You have now become an Amazon bestseller with The Prodigal Son. So once again, well done to you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
The people that reach out to you and that are thanking you for writing this book, what do you feel you're helping them with the most when it comes to those 3 topics that your book focuses around? What stands out the most?
It's different things for different people. The 2 people that have been the most vocal in thanking me and, oh my gosh, I needed this book, they're Amazon reviews, but one of them said, I've never felt closer to God. In 10 years, I have not felt this close to God, meaning that I think he was dealing with a lot of shame and knowing that someone else was dealing with similar things. And Clint got to a point in the story where he said, Sam, I think I finally love myself. So you have this man who thinks he's a piece of garbage, and then he finally understands that people love him not because of what he does for them, that they love him regardless of his mistakes. His mistakes were so public that he couldn't hide them. And so when people loved him after the accident, that surprised him, and that taught him the most about love. So people resonate with that part of the story a lot. They're battling their own shame, I think, is the biggest.
Yeah. And the prodigal son it's a story of two people, Clint and yourself, right?
Yes.
Now, there's many Sams all around the world that are living with somebody. I don't want to use the word addict yet, and I'm going to tell you why after you answer this question. But living with someone who is addicted to drugs, let me phrase it that way for now. What would your advice be for them to get through that? Because these people can also become extremely suicidal. Like they can't take this anymore. They've tried everything, and they end up being the ones taking their life instead of the one that's consumed by drugs. What got you through it? And what can you share with someone else listening to also get through it?
I think my greatest advice to people dealing with that is to be honest. I was in denial of his use, and it cost me a lot because I wasn't real with myself. And I enabled him in a lot of ways, because even when I knew about the addiction, I hid it. Not that second time, but the first time, because he relapsed very early in our marriage and I didn't tell family members about it. I was afraid of their judgment. I didn't go into counseling. I didn't take care of it. I just tried to manage it myself because I was worried about what other people thought instead of focusing on my own mental health, my own true situation. And so if I could give anyone any advice, it would be to be honest with yourself and what is happening in front of you, and to know that asking for help requires so much courage and bravery, but there's healing and there's help on the other side of vocalizing what you're going through.
Yeah. And why I said I didn't want to use the word addict.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, stay with me.
Yes, I'm ready.
There's a stereotype around the word addiction or addict. You know, the moment you reference someone as an addict, straight away, Kino's going to be like drugs, alcohol. But the reality of the matter is each and every single one of us are addicts, whether we know it or not. There's something that we are addicted to, whether it be legal medication, coffee, social media. So we are not, so if I'm addicted to coffee, for example, doesn't necessarily mean I have any mental illness. But then if somebody is addicted to drugs or alcohol, then we automatically assume it's mental illness. Why is that? Yeah. Okay, wait, one more thing before you answer. So we got someone now who's addicted to alcohol and drugs, but does it necessarily mean they are suicidal or they're just looking for the next fix?
Yeah, those are two different things, right? Because there are a lot of drug addicts, alcoholics that are not suicidal. And there are a lot of people who use drugs because they're trying to escape, they're trying to forget, they're trying to cope with abuse or tragedy or something really hard in life. So a lot of people use drugs as a coping mechanism. And then I think for people who are using it as a coping mechanism, sometimes it's not working the way that it should or the way that they want it to anymore. And so they're having to use more and more. And a lot of it's not, it's accidental suicide, right? The overdose is an accidental suicide. I had a nephew who died of overdose last year, actually. He was 19. He was using drugs and accidentally killed himself. And it's crazy. Like, drugs are dangerous. So I think it's twofold. It's two sides of a coin where some people are using drugs to cope. And then sometimes the drugs you have to take more and more. You have to take more and more and more in order to keep those thoughts away. Or you're dealing with, people who are just, they're using drugs because they're addicts, and then the drugs take their lives whether they want them to or not. Does that make sense? I don't it's hard to
I
explain,
guess
but
we
yeah.
both try to make sense of this because I
Mhm.
also I was researching, right?
Mm.
Because that's why there's because of this whole stereotype around addiction. And there's no set stats when it comes to people who are addicted to drugs or alcohol per country that have actually died by suicide. But there was one stat done, which I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but out of 22,000 plus patients, who were addicted to drugs or alcohol, only 163 out of that 22,000 died by suicide. Now that's quite low.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to figure out here is the link between addiction and mental illness. Is
Mhm.
there one? Is there not one? Do they just want to escape, but they really don't have any mental illness stuff going on up there? They don't want to die by suicide. They don't want to take their life. They just can't live without the substance.
Yes. I mean, that's true. And right, some people, that's their story. And then some people take the drugs in order to die. They're overdosing on pills because they know that will kill them, and they're doing that on purpose. Drugs are a tool in order to commit suicide in a lot of cases, unfortunately. And then drugs accidentally take someone's life in other cases, right?
So it's like
I
they
mean,
want to suffer. They want to
Mhm.
suffer before they leave.
With I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, the people who take the pills are just wanting to be done, right? I don't know if they want to suffer. They're already suffering. They're already in so much pain. They don't know how to escape the pain that they feel in their heads or their hearts.
I would add too that in a severity of addiction, the person's life is being destroyed.
Mhm.
So from that perspective, there's not one reason why a person would attempt suicide, right? It's multifactorial, right?
Right.
And certainly abusing drugs and alcohol can lead to dire consequences in many domains. And I also wanted to add in terms of deaths related to drug use, now you have to add in the mix, unfortunately, fentanyl, which can be a minuscule amount. And we're talking about grains of salt amount, and can be disguised in other pills. And you have the horror of someone who, it's a mistake, but now they're dead after just taking one pill, of which they thought it was something else.
100. That is how my nephew died. That he thought he was taking something different, or it was a different chemistry, and they killed him. He was not trying to kill himself. So,
Sam, you've been describing your own experience of shame. How did you journey through that?
it was really hard for me to be on the other side, to be the wife of the addict, to be the spouse of the addict, because he messed up. And there were people in the community talking poorly about me. There were people gossiping about me. I lost out on opportunities, professional opportunities and personal opportunities, because of his choices. So there was absolutely shame in being connected to him, and feeling like he chose to drink and drive, and I got to live with the consequences of his choice. But I was still connected to that. His story was my story. I couldn't separate myself from that at that point. It was embarrassing for a long time. I don't feel like I struggle with shame now, but in the midst, I think when I first married Clint and he relapsed, my shame came from feeling like I messed up. I should have known better. I should not have entered into a relationship with an addict. I didn't know what I was doing. People are going to judge me. I had a conservative upbringing, a conservative Christian upbringing, conservative friends. So I was really afraid of people judging me for the choice that I made to be married to him.
And what was it through your faith that you saw yourself through this?
Yes, 100%. And I don't feel like I made the choice that I would recommend everyone make, because I stayed married even after there was a physical fight between us. And there's domestic violence. So I don't recommend that people do what I did. There were not kids at the time. So if I could go back and talk to myself, I might have made a different choice at that point. This is not going to change. This is going to keep going. This is going to happen again. You need to get out. You need to take care of yourself. I think I wanted what was best for Clint. He had more sober days than drunk days, more sober days than days under the influence. And we got along and we had fun together when he was sober. So there was a lot of talking myself out of things. And I know a lot of your listeners are in the same situation, doing the same thing, trying to rationalize and reason. And when you're looking at someone in a situation like that from the outside, you're like, just leave, just move on, make a different choice. But it's not that easy. So I'm never going to judge someone and tell them what they have to do, but also be careful. You need to be safe. You need to do what's right for you. And that might mean taking a break from the person that you're with.
Do you avail yourself of any support services, 12-step, Al-Anon type groups, or professional counseling? Which one doesn't necessarily have to do, but I'm just wondering if that was something you were seeking or Clint was seeking as well.
Clint was part of 12-step programs. He did a lot of those, and I did one-on-one counseling. I went for years. I went to different counselors and talked through some issues and just to make sure that I was okay, right? I had to take care of myself too. So that was absolutely part of it.
And when the book was published, was Clint still alive?
Nope. He died in 2019 and I just published it in January. So it took me 7 years to write it because it was so hard. His story was so hard. And I actually paused in the middle of writing it to write other books and to write other content because I needed a break from the dark story that was his truth.
What persevered you to continue writing the book? Because you could have potentially just stopped.
As I wrote the story, I learned his heart. I saw his heart. I had to write the book from his perspective. It's written from my perspective and his perspective. So you get the spouse and the addict. But writing from his perspective changed me. And I saw what addicts go through. I saw what people who are depressed face. And it made me want to help other people who are going through similar things. It made me not want to give up. And his request was always in the back of my head as well. Like, I want you to write this book. I want you to finish this book. But it became my own anthem too, to help people understand that what they're going through is something that a lot of other people face.
What is your big dream for the book? Who do you want to read it? What, organizations or treatment centers or libraries? What's the big vision?
I wanted to be in jail. I had an inmate read a copy of it, and he's like, I couldn't put it down. I couldn't stop reading this book. It was amazing. People who are dealing with a lot of these things to read it. I want addicts to read it, to know, like I've been saying, right? Like, they're not alone in the shame that they feel, and they're not beyond redemption. I want family members and friends to read it, to know that what they're going through is normal, and to maybe get some insight into what is going on in the head of their loved one. And I want people who are judgmental of other addicts to read this, because I want them to know it's not as simple as, oh, he's an addict, she's an addict. The drug changes the person. The drug makes the choices for the person. And I want them to see how significant that battle is. So there are a lot of different people who could benefit from this book. And then also, and you can read this in the reviews of the book as well, but a lot of people are saying, I don't have an addiction, but this book resonated with me for the shame of feeling like I was unworthy or I wasn't good enough, and watching his journey to loving himself. That made a huge impact on my life, and I'm not an addict. So there are a lot of people who are saying that as well.
Had you shared the book with your faith, your church, or other religious organizations?
Yes, I have been working on that. It's a process, right? You share it.
What's that like? And also, I'm wondering, maybe they have prison ministries as well.
I have connected with a couple people who are actively involved in prison ministry, and we're in conversation about how to get this book into prisons because that will help people a lot, I think. That is one of my goals. So if any of your listeners happen to have that connection, that would be amazing. But it's there's a lot of legwork. There's a lot of talking to different people and putting yourself out there, and you get a lot of no's, but then there are some doors that open and there are opportunities that present themselves. So definitely being diligent to try to tell people, hey, this book is out there. Because I wouldn't consider myself a famous person, but I have an amazing story that a lot of people would benefit from. So it's worth sharing, and it's worth the work to let people know about the book.
So, Sam, your life continued after, sadly, Clint's death. Can you say something about the continued life that you were living?
Of course. So he passed away in 2019, and I actually got a full-time job right away because I didn't understand what I was going to be getting from life insurance. But we had to move to a new community so I could start my new job, and I was working full-time and grieving full-time and raising 3 little girls who were grieving full-time. There was a lot going on there. I think it was a couple years before we kind of settled into ourselves and figured out our new normal and healed significantly. There's still pain there, but there was a lot of healing that happened. And then in 2022, at the very beginning of 2022, I met Tim Schroeder, and he and I got married in 2023, October of 2023. He also helped me heal from a lot of it, and he healed broken pieces of our whole family, which was amazing.
From your experiences, what are helpful things that people can say and do in the midst of grief? And also, what are things that people might say which are frankly just awful and should not be said?
Less is more. Less is more with a griever. I would say, I'm sorry, I love you, I'm here, and that's it. Not, I know what you're going through, I understand what you're going through, and then a lot of people tell a story about something that they think is similar, but it's not. I think all grief is unique, all grief is different. I talk to other widows and I share my story, and I'll say a lot of times, for me, this is what it felt like. Because I know that even though I'm a widow and she's a widow, or he's a widower, our stories are different and our responses to the grief are going to be different. So even experiencing the same type of loss, I don't assume that I know what their story is or their reaction to a certain event is going to be. I'll say, like, for me, this is what it was. And if that resonates, we can have a conversation about it. But I think if you don't know, if you have no idea how that feels, then definitely less is more. I really appreciated cards. I appreciated gifts that were thoughtful, like practical things, as far as like a dinner gift certificate or a grocery gift certificate, or even a gas card, a gas gift certificate to go fill up my tank, because those are things I needed. So they were practical ways for someone to say, hey, I love you, and I don't necessarily understand what you're going through, but I'm here for you. I had a lot of friends who said anything you need, and they meant it. So I had a lot of people come over and help me with repairs around the house that I couldn't do myself and didn't necessarily have the money to do myself. So that was extremely helpful. I also have some great books that are good gifts for grievers. Someone needed, I have my poetry book, She Told Them They Were Loved, and a prayer journal for addiction, and another journal for infant loss. So when you don't know what to say, you can give the gift of a book and say, I don't know what you're going through, but this person understands, and I just want you to know I'm here for you.
And these are all books too that you had written, the ones that you just mentioned?
Yes. But there are tons of other ways that people can serve someone and give a gift without buying one of my books. But those are options. Someone wanted to give a gift to a griever. I wrote She Told Them They Were Loved because that's what I want my epitaph to say. When I die, I want people to say she told them they were loved. And it's a poetry book about hope and healing. And so it's a great gift for someone who's grieving, because a lot of times when you're grieving, you have like that static in your brain and you can't focus for long periods of time on long things. So it's poetry. So you just open to whatever page you want and you read whatever you want. And there are humorous poems in there. So if it's a day that you're not weeping and falling on the floor, you can laugh too. There's laughter in grief. So the intention was to create a book that someone could give to a griever to show that they love them without knowing what to say.
And Sam, could you say something about being a mother, helping your children through really profound loss?
Yeah, my kids were in counseling. We were all in counseling at the same time. My oldest daughter said she felt like she lost two parents because I was doing so poorly emotionally. So if any of your listeners or viewers are in a situation where they are single parenting or dealing with the loss of a loved one and trying to navigate that with small children, give yourself grace. Be patient with yourself, because you're doing the best that you can. You're doing the best that you can to the best of your broken ability. And you are loving your kids. You're just do your best and be patient with yourself.
Are you working on any new books now?
That should actually be the new book.
Which one? The mom book?
The mom book. Being a
Yeah.
single mom, while dealing with loss.
That was pretty hard. Except that single moms dealing with loss would not have time to read that book at all. They would not have. I could not take in any word. But right now I'm working in fiction. Like, I needed a break from all this heavy stuff, Diane. Oh my goodness, the miscarriage and the addiction and the cancer. It was so much. And it's helped a lot of people, but I am looking forward to writing fiction. I have my first novel coming out in October 6th. The Lakeshore Secret comes out, and I'm going to continue publishing other works that I've written and continue writing, because I write for fun. I write books for fun, which is not something that most people do, but I love it. So I'm excited about writing and then sharing my stories with the world.
How can our listeners learn more about you?
So if
And
you
where to purchase your books?
Yes. All right. So if you go to loveunedited.com, that is my website. And there's a button right there that says, let's connect. People can buy their copy of She Told Them They're Loved, or The Prodigal Son, or Prayers Against Addiction, whatever they want. They can also connect with me on social media there, on Instagram and TikTok and X and YouTube and all the things. And you'll see other videos in me and Kino on my YouTube channel, if you see that, and on my TikTok and on my Instagram. So you can connect with all of us over there at loveunedited.com. You can just click that button and connect.
How did you come up with the phrase love unedited, and what does that mean for you?
I started with grief unedited. That was my tagline for a long time, and I still use it, but it started as grief unedited, and then I did miscarriage unedited and addiction unedited, because my writing is very raw and very real and transparent, authentic. I don't pull punches in the things that I talk about. And I've actually gotten in a little bit of trouble for that with The Prodigal Son, because people don't like some of the content in there, but it's true. The content is true. And so that's where love unedited came from, because I didn't want, grief unedited for a handle. I'm not always grieving. Like, I'm not grieving right this second, So love unedited. It's a lot easier to spell than Schritter with a T. 6 silent letters in my name.
Grief is part of love.
It is.
If, and perhaps, I won't even say if, Clint's spirit is with us right now, right? And was listening to all you shared. What do you think he would say?
I think he'd say, well done. I think he'd say, good job. I'm proud of you.
Thank you,
You
Sam.
made me famous. Thank you.
Yeah, right. And I think he would say to other people, like, God loves you. God loves you no matter what.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you so much, Sam, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, you guys. It was a great honor to talk to you today. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. See you again soon. Bye.
See you soon. Bye.